I just found out I can't screen share and admit people at the same time. Is everybody able to hear? Good, okay. It'll be just a couple minutes. Just a couple minutes, folks. Thank you, Pete. I will accept your invitation to let people in once we get started. That'd be great. Okay, everybody, I think we're going to get started. Pete is going to let some other people in as they come. We're expecting quite a few more, but I'm sure that they will come along the way. I'd like to welcome everybody on behalf of IHC's Life After 50. This is our program entitled Inside and Outside of IHC, the Art of Our Congregation. And let me share just a little introduction here. First, a bit of housekeeping. We have muted everybody, and we're going to ask if you have any questions along the way, which we hope you will. Please use the chat function. Susan Moss, who will be our chat hostess, is going to be monitoring the questions, and we'll be taking them along at the end. You might find it easier to set your screen to gallery view, or even better, side-by-side view, and that way you'll be able to see the slides as they come up, as well as the presenter. Let me do a little bit of Zoom reality check, folks. Over the past year, we've learned that although we put in countless hours of prep and rehearsal, sometimes technology is stubborn. We'll try to make it seamless, but please be patient if it isn't. And a special shout out to Pete Smithheiser, our new executive director, for helping us set this up tonight. And it's enabling us to record it and become part of IHC archives. This program was conceived by LAF's Programming and Planning Committee. If you are on that committee, will you raise your hand so that we can recognize you? We're over 20 people strong in planning. A little bit of background, folks. Pre-COVID, IHC hosted a steady stream of visitors from schools and from churches. As temple tour guides led their groups through the sanctuary and the synagogue at large, we explained the features that made our building what it is and the art that's in our congregation. Why, the LAF committee discussed, don't we do something similar for our own congregation? Our thought was that there's history and background that many of us don't know, and that understanding this would enhance our own in the building experiences when we are once again able to gather together in the building. Joyce Kleinman, Barb Levy, Carolyn Heiser, Lynn Levy, Andrea Pachter, and Susan Moss, all congregants who had a hand in various aspects of IHC art and building, were called together. Over several months, pictures were collected, archives were searched, and memories shared. Program decisions were made, and tonight's program took shape. Realizing that there was so much to discuss, you'll notice that tonight we've limited our conversation to the previous building, the outside of our current building, and our sanctuary. Our hope is to create a future program that will discuss the chapel and large amount of art throughout the building at large. As I mentioned, we welcome questions. Please don't be shy. Just put them in the chat for us. We'll begin our program tonight with some words of welcome and introduction by Eloise Paul, president of our congregation. Eloise has a deep interest in art, so her words are especially appropriate. Eloise, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Marcia. And I grew up in a very art-focused family. I think I went to museums probably when I was 6 months old, and my mother took myself and my 6-year-old niece to a museum once, and the guard pulled out a book this big of all the museums in the country. And my niece said, "Oh my God, don't give it to her. She'll make us go to all of them." So art has always been an important part of my life. And Jewish visual art dates back to biblical times and has really flourished since then. Art has always been a source of human inspiration and expression. And a synagogue building can act as a concrete representation, both of the character and condition of the Jews, us who use the building, as well as representing what we believe and what we value. So you'll hear about, and we have lots of styles and types of art in our building. And if you think about it, maybe you can relate that to the wanderings of the Jews across the globe. So we have ritual old objects, some that people have dedicated out of love for our temple. Some is L'Ador V'Ador, which gives an added spiritual dimension. We have contemporary art that's more reflective of life today. And most people enjoy seeing art. It can be a conversation starter. People may love it, people may hate it, but it can inspire you. And art generally adds warmth to the environment and sets the tone for people as they enter a house of worship. The house of God should be adorned and should be beautiful. And art can help give people the spiritual lift that we want them to feel as they enter our building. So art, that's why art, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Eloise. A wonderful introduction as we move ahead. It is now my pleasure to turn the program over to Joyce Kleinman, a well-known local artisan, and who has some wonderful information about where we came from before we were at 6501 North Meridian. Joyce, it's yours.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody see my screen share?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm Joyce Kleinman, like she said. I've been a member of IHC since 1980. And back in 1997, I was given the honor to capture a piece of IHC's history. This first slide is the exterior of the 10th Street Temple. It was located at 10th and Delaware, and it was IHC's home from 1899 to 1957. The 10th Street Temple was constructed in the Roman Renaissance style and designed by the local architect firm of Vonnegut, Barn and Muller. I discovered some interesting trivia when I was doing my research on this diorama. In 1958, this building became the home of Jim Jones's People's Temple. He remained there until 1965. And yes, that's the same Jim Jones as the Guyana Massacre. And even more, I'm not sure if I really would call this an interesting fact, but just something that makes me wonder, because in 1975, the building was destroyed by a fire, and I believe they never found the cause. So at that, and during when that fire, all the stained glass was smashed, the entire first floor was burnt, and it fell into the basement. The old temple was gone forever. And actually the spot where it stood still remains a vacant lot, which is another mystery. Anyways, at this, if you can take a look, you'll see the picture also of the stark remains. You can see that there still is the iron framing or whatever, the metal part of it that was used to create the actual stained glass windows. Notice those shapes, and I'll point that out to you again in a later slide. Okay, let's see. Nope. Okay, guys, give me just a second. It's not. Oh, there we go. It
There you
advanced.
go.
Yay. Okay, this window is depicting Moses' descent from Mount Sinai. It was donated to the temple by Emma Eckhouse as a memorial to her husband, whose name was Moses. When it was installed in 1899, it was the first window containing a human figure to be placed in any Orthodox, conservative, or Reformed synagogue anywhere in the United States. It is now located in the stairwell on the south side of our current building on North Meridian Street. It is the last remaining physical link of the 10th Street Temple. Next to it is a plaque that describes its history. I'm not going to read the plaque to you. You're welcome to go back to the south part of the lobby, or and read it yourself. But to give you a brief overview of it, there was a lot of controversy over the artist's rendering that follows the famous statue of Moses sculptured by Michelangelo. And it shows Moses with two horns of light protruding from his head. The question was, why did Michelangelo put horns on his sculpture? It was believed that Michelangelo based his creation on a misreading of the Hebrew text in Exodus 34:29. The Hebrew phrase is believed to say Moses' face was radiant. However, since there were no vowels, the word for to glow could be misread for the noun horn. And in addition to the concerns about the horn, there was a concern that a depiction of a human being might become an object of idolatry. Since the congregation could not arrive at an amicable decision, the committee was delegated to bring the matter to the attention of the eminent Rabbi Isaac Weiss of Cincinnati. So in 1899, he made the final decision, and he installed and dedicated the window. He had made a comment that he didn't think any Reformed Jew anywhere in this country would decide it was idolatry just to see an image of a person. Again, in 1999, though, 1991, the IHC Board of Directors considered a proposal to remove the horns. There was concern that this reinforced a medieval anti-Semitic stereotype which characterized Jews as the devil. But in the end, the board decided to not alter this work of art and hoped that hanging it unchanged would become a teaching tool about Moses, the history of IHC, idolatry, and anti-Semitism. Okay. Now this is a picture of the model that I made for the temple, and it does not have Moses's window in it. I decided that was more of a challenge to recreate that, but it does have some other windows. Well, during the remodeling of our temple in 1997, the Art Acquisition Committee, which consisted of Susan Moss and myself, were tasked with creating ways to display the history of IHC. One of my hobbies was making 1-inch to 1-foot scale miniature vignettes. When Susan came up with the idea and asked me to make a replica of the 10th Street Temple, my immediate response was no. I had no idea how I would do this. This was bigger and more detailed than anything else I had ever done. Plus, the building was no longer in existence. So how was I going to know what was inside this temple? We had a picture of the exterior, but that was it. So after spending many, many hours going through the archives closet, and if anybody's done that, they know what I mean. There's just so much stuff there. And I don't know if it is now, but back then it was not in any form of order or organization. And I also spent many hours interviewing congregants who remembered the building. And I finally had a plan, and I decided I could do this. Once my labor of love was completed, it was first displayed in a cabinet in the north lobby, And then when we remodeled again in 2010, it was moved to the south lobby. There we go. Okay. There. Oh, I think I skipped a slide. Oh no, going the wrong way. Bear with me for a second, guys. See how we said technology. Let me share again. It skipped a slide. There. There we go. Okay, this one here, I put up some pictures with some rulers. If you've never seen a miniature replica, if you haven't seen this in person, you might have no idea what the size is. And like I said, I do 1 inch to 1 foot scale. And what that means is if something in that miniature is 3 inches high, in real life, it would be 3 feet high, excuse me. And if you looked in the bottom corner here, not only do I have the ruler, I also put a quarter down next to one of the benches to give it another perspective of what it looked like. Let's see if I can make this go right. Here we go. Now these are the ones with the bird's eye view. This gives you a little bit more detail of some of the areas. And if you'll notice that the benches and the bima are curved. I did not know this in the beginning when I first started to do this as my project progressed. I was walking off of only one yellowed picture that we found that I made off of a slide that we found in the archives. And that picture made it look like a very flat image. So everything looked like it was nicely squared off. And I had personally never done any form of woodworking in my miniatures that I was making. So I commissioned someone to make the benches. But as my project was progressing, I needed more detail. So once again, we went back to the archives closet, and this time I found a floor plan with congregants' names. These were used for the high holiday seatings that people, I assume, bought their different seats. And there was probably a hierarchy of where people got their seats. And this was drawn to scale, and that's when I found out that the benches and the bima were curved. I immediately called the woodworker, told him of the changes I needed him to make, and he said, no way. He said, you cannot afford to pay me what I would have to charge you for curved benches. So I had a real dilemma. And with the help of some very creative friends, I learned how to become a woodworker and how to make curved benches. It was probably one of the biggest frustrations, but being able to figure this out and making sure my rendition was as accurate as possible, this was really one of the biggest rewards. Here's some more close-ups of some of the things, and many have asked me what are inside the books. Actually, the pages are blank, but I did put some labels on the cover of a few of them. But the Torah scroll did have some Hebrew on it. I actually found a place that sold miniature replicas of Judaica, which, if you can see in the middle picture, it also shows the yod. It shows a small shofar. And then I also made white flowers to represent the high holidays, because that's usually the color of the flowers that was put on the bima. And then I don't think you can see it that well, but to the table to the left is also got like candlestick holders and matchbooks. There we go. Oh, and also notice, I just remember the little pearls on the arches. They were actually the lights that had the arches of the building. And one of the congregants told me that when she was bored, that they would count the burnt out bulbs and along the arches. So there were a lot of bulbs up there. I can't imagine what it must have been like to go up and change those bulbs. And this is where I told you to remember the arches, how they were shaped. So I had wanted to recreate some of the existing stained glass. And I really had originally wanted them to be out of stained glass. So I asked a couple glass artists, and unfortunately they also turned me down because they said it was too small and too detailed for them to be able to work on it. So again, I went back to the archive closet to figure out what we could do this time around. And we found some colored pictures of the original windows. This was really great, except I had another problem. They weren't the right size for the size of the 1 inch to 1 foot scale. So I decided, okay, I would just have some color copies made of these. Another problem is that these were professional pictures. So when I went into the different copying stores, they informed me that they needed the artist's permission in order to make the copies. I informed them that these pictures were at least 40, 50 years old, and possibly even more so. There was probably the photographer wasn't around anymore, but none of them were helpful. But I kept going from store to store. And finally, I found one employee who wasn't paying attention, didn't turn the picture over, didn't see the stamp on the back that it was a professional photographer, and actually made the copies for me. So then what I did is I proceeded to cut up pieces of the colored copies, and then I put them back together in a jigsaw puzzle type format, just making them larger, adding more space between each of the items to just create the size that I needed. A little artistic license, I guess, because if you did look at the original, they're not exact, but I feel like they came close enough. You know, many people I have found along the way have asked me, how long did this project take me? You know, honestly, I'm not a good detail person like that. So I really didn't keep good track of my time. But for some reason, when I was making the first window, I was just really curious, you know, so I started accurately marking down all the time I spent. And it literally was over 40 hours, not to plan it and figure it out, but to actually just physically make the one window. All told, I spent more than 6 months making this project. And I worked pretty much so full time, sometimes into the wee hours of the morning, that when I would get on a roll, I wouldn't want to stop. And so, like I said, it was totally a labor of love, but it was interesting the time that it took. Okay, let's see if I can, there we go. Here's another close up of some of it. This is where you can see the little table to the left of the where I have the candlesticks and the matchbook. And, you know, one of the amazing and fun things about this is people have asked me so many questions about it. You know, questions ranging for why did I pick burgundy? Or how did I make the organ? Or why is there American flag on the bema? And the questions were really fun, and I loved answering as many as I could. You know, a lot of them wanted to know, well, how did you create the candelabras? How did you do this? And so that was totally wonderful for me. But what was even better is I loved hearing the stories, hearing the memories that this miniature was bringing to life for them. One congregant stood in front of the miniature with me, and she had tears in her eyes. And she pointed to where she sat with her father, who had just recently passed away. Another said to me that the organ was in the front, but the choir loft, along with additional congregant seating, was located in the balcony in the back, and there was no air conditioning in the building. I could tell, I think, by the way she was describing it, that that's where her family sat. And obviously, we're not very happy with a non-air conditioned building as all heat rises. But that was just one of many, many stories. Another reoccurring question, or actually, should I say a concern from quite a few people, was why did I give Extra B Fairbanks such prominence in my miniature? If you see the picture on the bottom left is where the close-up of where the plaques sit, and then the top two are a close-up of the replicas that I made. But then on the right, you can see the original ones that is now located, you know, along the lobby across from the chapel. So as you can see, what I had never noticed until I started trying to figure out how I was going to replicate this yard-site plaque was the fact that Esther B. Fairbanks did have prominence from it. But there's such a big plaque in the way they sit, and you have to look up so high. The majority of congregants have never noticed her name before. Okay, this is this area, that circle to the left of this picture, this particular space in my miniature really brought about an interesting confrontation, should I not? It was just a little intense and it was fun because at one IHC event, a congregant came over to me and said, I need to talk to you now. And I went, okay. And she grabbed me and took me by the arm, and we stood then in front of my miniature. And she said she was really angry at me. And I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out what I did that made her so angry. And then she finally said, do you see that area there to the left, the area that I have now circled in this picture? And I said, yeah. She said, you know what was there? She said, there was the door to the restroom. And once you got behind there, there was a door to the outside, and it was my escape. When I sit here and look at this miniature, I feel trapped and panicky that I can't get out. So I obviously apologized to her profusely and told her that unfortunately, I just had 4 feet of space to work with and something had to go. And I'm sorry that it was her escape route. But she eventually forgave me and we laughed about it. So now here's another picture that gives you a little bit more perspective of the size. That was a picture of me with the miniature not long after it was put in its current location. And like I said, there's been just so many wonderful stories, and there's just one more at this time that I would like to share with you. This was when the miniature was in the north lobby, and I don't know if you remember that Wednesday school, and the kids would be let out, and they would congregate in that hallway until their parents came to pick them up. And I used to love to stand when people were by the miniature. I would stand close enough to hear, but far enough away that I didn't seem to be a part of any conversation, or that I was really there for any reason to do with the miniature. And there were a bunch of younger boys that were looking at the miniature, and they were all like chatting away and pointing at different things in the miniature. And then one of them asked, "Do you think this is our temple?" And another one responded as, "I don't think so. It looks old." And then another one said, "Hey, I'll go check." And he ran into our current sanctuary and came back out and proclaimed it. He said, "Nope, it's not our temple. It's not the sanctuary." So they still kept looking at it and pointing at things. And finally, one of them said, "You know what? I bet you this was our old building. This is probably what our temple used to look like." So it made me really smile to sit here and think that probably a bunch of boys that would have never listened to somebody trying to tell them the history of the temple were actually giving themselves their own little history lesson. So these are just a few of the wonderful stories and wonderful happenings. And once again, I just felt very lucky to be able to make something like this that was enjoyed and continues to be enjoyed by so many. I thank you all.
Thank you, Joyce, very much. You did a wonderful job, and for all your contributions. I don't think there's a time I go in the building that I don't stop and look at that miniature. It does bring back my own childhood memories of sitting in that building. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Barb Levy. Barbara has been a member of our Building and Grounds Committee and was chairman of the committee that created our sanctuary and our building renovation the way it is now. Barbara, it's yours. Barbara?
Excuse me, I was muted because that's what you told us all to do. But anyway, thank you, Marcia. And it's lovely to be here this evening. My family and I have been members of IHC since 1967. When we moved here from Chicago, one of the first things we did was come and join IHC, and we've been very involved in it ever since. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the outside of the building. And by 1956, we had outgrown the 10th Street building, and it was time to move on to our current location, 65th and Meridian. The beautiful new building was designed by C. Wilbur Foster and Associates, and I've been told there is an exact replica of our building in Nashville, Tennessee, designed by the same architect. When the congregation decided to move to North Meridian, they chose a theme to be used for the building. And with the guidance of the rabbi at that time, Rabbi Maurice Goldblatt, they chose the verse from Leviticus, Kedushim Tehihu, which is often called the Holiness Code. Ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord, your God, am holy. The theme is also carried out in the sanctuary, and I forgot to screen share, so give me a minute. See, talk about the glitches, just a second. Uh-oh. It's not here, Marcia.
Okay, let me get it for you.
I apologize. Wait a minute. No, that's the inside.
There it is.
Okay, let me get rid of this and we'll go back. Okay, and there. This is the outside. And the previous one was just a drawing that was done of the building by, whoops,
Whoop, just a minute.
here,
What are you looking for? You're looking
the
for
first
that
one.
one.
Yeah,
That's it.
this
Okay.
is a drawing of the building that was done by is it J.P. Singh, the artist. And it's on some of our, I don't know if we're still using them, but it has been on our note cards for a long time. So let me get the slideshow.
You want the next one?
Yeah. And here's a picture of the building as it stands today. And you're going to hear more about how the theme of this is carried out in the sanctuary itself. a stone front constructed of Indiana sandstone laid in rubble style with a 35-foot high center stripe of, pardon me, Indiana limestone. It's adorned with a huge metal replica of the Torah. And above the Torah is an inscription in stone of our motto, Kiddushim Tehiyah. As you are aware, buildings are built from the ground up. So the first line of the theme that was put up was, "Your God am holy." And you can imagine the multitude of calls we received from people driving by and thinking a correction was in order. Next slide. Okay. You may remember that the 1956 building didn't have a very auspicious, go back, that's the one, thank you. Didn't have a very auspicious main entrance. As you can see from the photo, the south entrance door is barely, if at all, visible from the street. So when we did the renovation in 2010, we redesigned the front entrance to the one that you are now familiar with. It was designed to be an entrance to our Jewish story. From the base of the long staircase, you want to go on to the next one? Next slide. This is it under construction, and you can see this is where the stairs started. And then this is the walk that goes up to the main entrance. It was designed to be an entrance to our Jewish story. Now you can change. Next slide. Okay. From the base of the long staircase, there are 5 stone pillars on the right, representing the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And on the left, there are 12 wooden pillars that represent the 12 tribes of Israel: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. So the next time you enter the building from that entrance, and I hope you do use that entrance because it is the main one, stop and admire these symbols. They will lead you inside to continue our story. Thank you. Sorry for all the glitches.
Oh, we're okay. Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to go back just a minute. And for anybody who grew up at IHC with Harvey Gaddy, who was the custodian, and we loved him dearly. There was at that time a garden over here called the Harvey Gaddy Memorial Garden, which I've always thought was quite beautiful, that we would remember somebody with that kind of love and affection and incorporate it into our architecture. It is now my pleasure, thank you again, Barbara. It is now my pleasure to introduce Carolyn Heiser to you. Carolyn has been our chief tour guide for the temple, leading what I call TT's Temple Tours, and has been a part of our congregation and leadership since childhood. I was just joking that with her, that my sister and she even roomed together on their confirmation class trip to New York. So Carolyn, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you very much. If you'll unmute. Carolyn, can you unmute?
Now I can. There we
Okay,
go.
thank you.
My pleasure. But you got my screen share, I think. Am I?
I think you put yours up, didn't you?
I did. Let's see if I can get back to it. Oh, so there we go. It won't let me move through.
You want me to bring it up for you?
Well, I guess so.
Carolyn, that's what happened to mine. I just had to start all over again. I had to unscreen share, go back and
Okay, let me do
start it
that.
from the beginning. I don't know why I did that.
Okay, let me try again. Okay. From the
There you
beginning.
go.
And slideshow, whatever that is. Nope, like me. Okay, let's go there. Let's try this
Do
one.
you want to stop the screen share and I'll bring it up from my computer?
Okay, let's try this.
There you go.
Okay, so sorry about that. The theme from Leviticus is carried out in the sanctuary as well. We were a congregation big on themes at that time. And so as Barbara explained, Leviticus 19 was what they chose for the outside and the sanctuary. The Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh on the wall represents God's presence in the sanctuary and all around us. There's a piece of stone representing God's presence beneath the earth, a piece of clay representing the earth, and a piece of wood representing God's presence above the earth, or in other words, all around us. The Ner Tamid follows that theme. If you can see it, it's a little bit hard, but on the front of the grill, around it, it says Kadosh. And then there's a little piece of stone, a piece of wood, and a piece of clay supporting the bottom. So it carries the theme on into the Ner Tamid, or the light that burns all the time, reminding us that God is there all the time. On the opposite wall is a representation of the Ten Commandments. It was a plaque that was presented to the congregation in honor of a rabbi who served there for many years, Rabbi Froelich. When we were kids, we kind of used to refer to it as the spider web. It's a very contemporary representation of the Ten Commandments, but not as contemporary as we became later. As you probably know, in most congregations, there is in the sanctuary a representation, or a menorah with 7 branches that is usually lit on Shabbat, representing the 7 days of creation. And ours is a bit stylistic in our last renovation, but we wanted it to be there, even though we now use the newer one with just the 2 candles. We wanted to have that bit of history there. So our architect designed this one to transition, I guess. While the theme has remained the same since the building was built, the decor has changed and been updated from time to time. The picture on the left is a picture of the sanctuary as it was when we built the building in the 50s. You'll see that the ark, you probably can't, well, you can't see the colors because it's a black and white picture, but the ark was different. It was taller. It went from floor to ceiling. And the back of the ark was mosaic tiles in teals and blues. It was lovely. The curtain that you can see there was kind of a open weave, see-through curtain. So even when the curtain was closed, you could still see the Torahs. It was also blues and greens and silvers. And the Torahs are resting on shelves. And there's a post, or a linear decor that goes up from each of those to the top. And at the top of that were the 3 plaques that you saw on the wall a little while ago. Those 3 plaques actually rested in the ark when it was designed, the Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. On the right was the next renovation. It was the same height, the same size, but it was a wood lattice, a little more contemporary. And the 3 plaques still rested in there. You can't see them in this particular picture, but the Torahs were there, and the 3 Kadosh plaques were also at the top. Our current ark was designed by our own Lynn Levy, and it also relates the holiness code, or brings it into more focus, and became the main focus of the sanctuary as it had since the building was built. It was a conscious decision to have the ark be a central focus of the sanctuary and truly be a home to the Torah. Since much of the design for the new sanctuary was linear, it was decided to make the ark circular and bring it forward from the wall to make it more prevalent. Lynn worked with the renowned artist Mordechai Rosenstein, whose work you see on the right. He created an interpretation of that text from Leviticus, Kiddushim Tehiyu. The Kiddushim is the big letters across. Tehiyu is the small letters, which are actually the handles on the ark, meaning ye shall be holy. And he adapted that work to fit our circular ark. The artist first created the image, and then he transferred it to the brushed brass piece that you see on the ark. As the ark and the decor evolved through the years, so did the Torah covers. The original covers were very simple and plain. When we put the lattice work, the wood lattice behind the ark, the Torah covers were needle-pointed by members of the sisterhood, and were in a much more contemporary style to go with the style of the ark. The ones that we use today were commissioned by IHC from the local artist Susie Friedman. Susie designed them. One honors the theme of the sanctuary, the Kadosh, 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 which you can see on the left. And at the top, you can see the words Kadosh, 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 and the tablets and the menorah. One honors Shabbat, which is the one you see there in the middle. You can see the grapes at the top for wine, the candlesticks, honoring the theme of Shabbat. And then the one on the left honors the Torah that it covers. We are privileged in our congregation to have what we have come to call our Holocaust Torah. Not sure if you're aware of what went on with these, but as Hitler marched through Europe, destroying the Jewish people, he thought, certainly destroying the artifacts, the temples, and the physical structures, he made a point of preserving Torahs, prayer books, sometimes menorahs, and we're told that the plan was to build a museum showing what he had destroyed. They were all very well preserved in kind of a warehouse, a cave kind of thing. They were cataloged. They were pretty well maintained and marked where they came from, as you would for museum pieces. Obviously, he did not succeed. At the end of the war, for many years they sat there. Nobody knew what to do with them until a group of people in England, kind of like a historical society, decided that that was totally inappropriate. The Jewish people were still alive and well. And so they set about restoring and refurbishing all of the artifacts that were there, cataloging them. And then they set up a lending program, kind of a worldwide library where congregations around the world could borrow these pieces with the condition that they would be used and that they would be maintained. And so they're kind of on a permanent loan. Ours comes from a small congregation in the town of Dubčić in Czechoslovakia. And if the congregation there is ever revived, we certainly will give it back to them. But in the meantime, we use it in their memory. So the Torah cover that Susie designed tells its history. At the bottom of the cover, you can see a depiction of a small European town with a wall around it, an old style synagogue in the middle, representing its history. You see the arm reaching up in the uniform of a concentration camp with the yellow star, a hand reaching out of that sleeve toward the tree of life. And in Hebrew, it says, excuse me, it doesn't say that. It says, Am Yisrael Chai. It says, Israel lives. So it tells the story of that particular Torah for all of us to keep in mind. One interesting fact about our building and renovation is that all of the wood for the paneling in the sanctuary, the social hall, and the ark come from one single tree. It is sliced so thin and The veneer is so fragile, but it is one tree that served for all of that. We tried to be ecologically conscious as we built it, and we think we have achieved that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. You are a tour guide extraordinaire, and we appreciate it very, very much. I'm now going to turn it over to Lynn Levy, who is an architect, as mentioned, as Carolyn mentioned, that helped design the current Ark and the one before. Lynn, it's yours. You want me to share your pictures?
Yes, please.
Okay.
We can just start with the first slide.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. I know these will be a little bit difficult to see, but I just thought it would be interesting for everybody to get a chance to see some of the schematic drawings that were created when the building and the sanctuary were renovated back in the early 80s, is when we moved away from the Ark with the curtain. And when we renovated the sanctuary, we took a look at everything in it. There was a long interview process of several architectural firms for the renovation of the sanctuary. And I happened to sit on that committee. I was on the House committee at the time as well. It was very early in my career. And when the firm was selected, they were delighted to have gotten the job, but they did not feel comfortable or armed to design what they felt to be the most sacred element in the sanctuary, which was the Ark. So a lot of discussion ensued, and we decided that we could look within our own congregation to whoever we might have that could assist with that. And I was very honored to be asked to be involved in that process. So I don't know how many of you might remember what the old sanctuary looked like, but there was a big, huge kind of plaster bulkhead that ran down the center of the room from the back wall that we could open up to take in the social hall to expand the space all the way down to the Ark. And it really made the Ark a focal point, but it was a big plaster bulkhead that was much lighter and more in keeping with the finishes of the sanctuary at the time. The renovation design incorporated a lot more wood and really warming up the room and bringing the wood that was on the walls into a lot more elements in the space. And so we saw that as an opportunity to make the Ark a bit more traditional rather than having kind of this wall with the curtain. We wanted to go back to what was more traditionally thought of as the cabinet for the Torahs, which is what you typically see in a sanctuary. But the scale of the room, of course, wasn't going to allow us to have just a regular size cabinet. It had to be commensurate with the height of the space and also take advantage of the elevation of the bima so that it could be seen at a great distance, because the room in those days was much narrower and much deeper, completely different proportion than what we have in the sanctuary now. So we still have these walls that kind of tucked behind where the back wall of the Ark was. And the idea was to create this cabinet, as Carolyn mentioned, that had more of a curve that reached out more to the congregation, and then to take those walls, and it's kind of hard to see in the drawing, and it really wasn't easy to see in the photos, but tuck them behind the Ark and then put some lighting back there that you couldn't see, but when it came on, it would kind of create this glow and set off the Ark separate from all the walls of the same material behind it. It was also a desire to bring the Ner Tamid down and make it more of a focal point. It was up so high in the original design of the sanctuary that it was frequently overlooked. Most people didn't really get a chance to see it. So the original Ark design was to curve the front of it where the doors were, but flip the curve the other way. When the doors were opened, the curve of the Ark, and if you can go to the next slide, I can maybe describe this a little bit better. When the doors were opened, the curve was reversed. So it was convex, reaching out to the congregation when the doors were closed. But when the doors were slid open, the back wall was curved in the opposite direction so that there was something for the Torahs to lean up against. And then up above the doors, there was that same inside curve that kind of cradled the Ner Tamid and really gave it more of a prominence and a backdrop so that it was much more easy to see in relation to everything else. and as Carolyn also mentioned, the artwork, we knew that the theme Kiddushin Tihiyu was very elemental to our whole organization, but it was a little bit frustrating that it was only on the outside of the building and not inside in the space where we worship. So we saw that opportunity to bring that theme into a piece of art on the Ark itself. But it was really important to me to make sure that it wasn't just some element hanging on the front of the cabinet. So we worked to design it to follow the curve for the main part of the lettering, but also to locate it in such a height that the smaller letters could be used as the actual handles to open and close the doors when the Ark was open and closed. All of the wood was at that time, just as it is now, meant to match the walls. And you can imagine there were some dimensional challenges to build a cabinet this large and get the doors to slide and be very clean and close smooth with no joint. It was really an interesting process to go through creating it. So that Ark stood in that location until the most recent renovation in 2010. If you want to switch to the next slide, I can show you a construction shot. So this would have been a reconstruction of the 1984 Ark, being scaled down because the new sanctuary wasn't as tall. So we had to shorten it. And also we had to reskin it with a new veneer from this tree that Carolyn mentioned, which all the wood in the sanctuary, but we wanted to keep the design. The only difference, probably the biggest change to the Ark when it was moved from that location to the new sanctuary was that we did not maintain that reverse curve for the Ner Tamid. The whole thing was curved in the convex fashion, reaching out to the sanctuary. And if you want to show the last slide, just to remind everybody, here's how it sits currently.
Thank you, Lynn. So interesting. I especially thought that was fascinating to see it in the work. Before we go on to let Susan Moss take the questions, I'd like to share a funny story with you that I understand really happened many, many years ago. What I heard happened was, it was when they had the curtain in front of the Ark. And at that time, the rabbi would open the Ark with an electric button. There was one electric button on his lectern and one on the floor right by the Ark. What the children did not know was that he opened the Ark by stepping over that button, and he closed it that way. And of course, children think things are magical. The consecration class at that time were first graders. They got back to their room after practicing, and the teachers noticed that they were missing a child. They, of course, went on a scavenger hunt to find the missing young man, and they found him in front of the Ark, thinking it was magic, putting his hands out and going, Shema, because in his mind, that was the magic word that opened the Ark. That really, or fit a midrash and a Baba Misa, I don't know, but I think it's wonderful.
Well, and if I can just add to that a little bit, Rabbi Davis was quite the technology buff long before technology was cool. He had those buttons. He also had buttons below. If you were sitting in his chair on the bima and your arm was hanging down next to it, right underneath there were another set of buttons. One that opened the Ark and closed the Ark, one that turned the lights in the exit lamps. In those days, we didn't have quite the same codes we do now, from red to green. And it was assigned to the ushers when they could let people in, and when we were when we're standing for the Shema, when we were not allowed to go in and out. So it was quite the technology feat, even in the 50s and 60s.
At that time also, there were certain seats on the central aisle that had a hearing device, and you would hold it up to your ear, but they were enabling anybody who had hearing difficulties to be able to hear what was going on in the bima in an amplified way. And this was in 57, so quite ahead of its time. Thank you for sharing that, Carolyn. Susan, questions that have come from participants?
I do. They've been fun. Okay, so I think I'll just kind of go in the order that I received them with a little tweak. Joyce, the first one of the first ones directed toward you. Do you happen to know, or do any of the speakers know, where the original glass from the 10th Street Temple that Joyce duplicated in the miniature, does anyone know where the original glass came from?
I have no idea. I will have to hope somebody else might
Well,
know. That's a good
Yeah,
question.
they were massive.
We didn't build that building. I don't believe that we, if I remember correctly, we purchased that building. So I don't know that we would even have that history.
I
And
didn't
were
know
they
that.
part of the building? Do you know if they were part of the building when it was purchased?
I believe so.
Well, that's good to know
Don't quote
too.
me on, but I believe so.
Okay, and then another question about the 10th Street Temple. There was no, Joyce, perhaps you remember and did not include it. Was there an Israeli flag?
Not in the picture that I had. And I tried to copy what I had there. And I don't remember any person telling me. There was some changes that people told me along the way that saw it as I was in the process of making it. And I don't remember anybody saying that needed to have an Israeli flag. That's an interesting question. I do not know.
Okay, anybody else? Any comment?
Well, we left that building in the 50s. Israel did not become a state until 49. So there probably was not an Israeli flag at that time.
I was trying to put that together too, although, and in what year did temples start having
Right.
American?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, when did that become a traditional thing?
And if they did even have it, probably the pictures that I used were prior to that.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Okay. And then Carolyn, do you know, this is the hard one. Do you happen to know who the artists were who created the Kadoshas and the 10 Commandments?
No, I do not.
Because they've been there forever. Yeah, that's
57, yeah. They were a part of the original design. I do not.
so I would say that when it comes to purchasing artwork for temple, for temple renovation, and there are companies that carry, like ateliers, they carry beautiful pieces that you can purchase that are created by multiple people that you can purchase for temple adornment. So I know that from when Joyce and I were working together. So sometimes it isn't one specific artist, but you purchase it because there's a mood that you're trying to create. And this is a beautiful rendition that allows you to set a tone, just as Eloise was saying. So sometimes it isn't a specific artist, but a temple will purchase a piece of artwork that is available to them through these Jewish, Judaic artist outlets that provide them specifically for that purpose. So I think sometimes that's what we see. And I don't know if that's true or if that's helpful, but sometimes if we don't have,
Yeah, especially if your architect is not Jewish, they'll seek those places out to.
right, to help you.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was that. And then there was, in the very beginning, and this was kind of a beautiful conversation going through the chat. Does anybody know, and Joyce and I know, Joyce probably knows better than I, where the archive closet is now. I don't know where it is now. What's in the archive closet? What kinds of things are in it? There was a lot of interest in volunteering to go through it, catalog it. Sonia offered that a lot of it has been given to the Historical Society. Is it possible to volunteer at the Historical Society?
Yes, it is.
Work?
It's possible. Yeah.
Our material. So could you?
Most of our materials are at the Historical Society. There's very little left in the archive closet right now. After the renovation, we started they asked if we would donate our materials there. I don't know if any of you or how many of you remember Carolyn Leeds? Carolyn just died maybe a few months ago.
Yeah.
Carolyn was a volunteer that went down to the Historic Society every week and worked on the archives to sort them out and help them arrange them so that they would have them, you know, be able to display them or keep them in their their archives. They are available for people to see. You cannot take them out. You can make copies of them. They belong to the archives now. They no longer belong to us. But I need to find out. I believe the gentleman that we worked with all that time has retired. So I need to find out who would be the person that we should contact if people do want to go down there and volunteer. And I saw on the chat that one of the gals was a historian, and it would be wonderful if she had some time to be able to do that. So let me find that out, and I'll get the information back to the temple, and then you can go from there.
Well, I can back it up just a little bit from that. During a prior renovation, we had a congregant who also was somewhat of a historian and an archives expert, and she preserved and cataloged and organized and boxed most of our history up to that point. We built a closet. Well, we took a closet. We didn't build it. We took a closet. We commandeered a coat closet, reinforced it, and tried our best to temporize it. But it became overwhelming. We're 150 years old, and the archives became overwhelming, and they were all boxed up, and nobody could use them or see them really or get to them. So there was quite a discussion. When we did the renovation, we actually built an archive room, which is at the end of the clergy hall, staff hall. It was specifically designed for storing archives, but even that we outgrew very quickly. And as you all know, we come and go, and we move, and we stay, and we die. And there wasn't anybody who was continuing to keep those records and knew what they were and where they were and how they were and whatever. And so when we were approached by the Historical Society, we felt that that was a much safer way to keep our history safe and long-term. We still would have access to it. We still could go look at it, but we knew that it would be preserved appropriately. So all of those boxes that Lonnie McCowan worked on so diligently, and the archive paper that we bought and bought and bought, we spent quite a bit of money on it, but it was worth it, is all now down there for that reason. We just don't have the staff or the facilities to keep it safe.
And besides our archives, the Federation's archives there, the centers are, I'm pretty sure that Bethel's are also. So they have gathered all the Jewish archives of the city down there, and they're all available for people to view. They just make copies that you just can't take them out of there.
Along with what everybody has said, not only Indianapolis archives, but all the archives of the Indiana Jewish Historical Society
Yeah, they're
are now down there also, and they were moved from Fort Wayne maybe about 5-6 years ago. So it's all centralized for Indiana Jewish history in general.
Makes it easier for students to study and researchers to research.
Correct.
And it's safer.
Yeah, wonderful.
Someone unmuted me. My name's Jill. I've just been a member here for I guess a 1.5 years, 2 years, just before the pandemic, of course. But I'm the vice president of the history committee for the Jewish Historical Society, and I work at the Indiana Historical Bureau. And I would love to check in. It was Paul Brockman that was.
Yes, it was. Mm-hmm.
And now it's Mary, and I'm going to ruin the last name. It's Kieras or something. I could definitely check in with her and just report back to the
That'd be great.
Committee on the status of everything, and make sure that, just kind of check in on it, make sure that it's still being taken care of, and see what they need, because I would be happy, and I saw some other people chime in that if there's stuff that needs to be, you know, put in new archival folders, or if there's a chance we could get some stuff digitized, like I would be happy to work on that. So maybe
Well,
I'll take
yeah.
a gander and report back.
If you can find out who, what they want, there are a few more boxes still in the, what we lovingly call the archive closet, which has turned into a real junk closet, to be perfectly honest. But there are still a few more things there. Carolyn was going through and she was also doing a lot of identification, but Carolyn knew the community so well that she could look at a picture and say, oh, that's Joe Smith, and that's Mrs. Smith, and that's Barbara Levy, and that's Lynn Levy, and so on and so forth, which was wonderful. But unfortunately, we miss her and she's no longer with us.
Yeah, and maybe if we got some of it digitized, then it would be easy to spread around and say, hey,
Have people, yeah.
this photo, yeah.
Thank you so much for volunteering, Jill.
That's great.
Really,
That's
this is
great.
a really nice contact that came out of this program.
Welcome
Thank
and
you.
welcome.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
Susan,
So-
are there other questions you have?
There was one other question, and please feel free to chat me more questions, but one other question about the archives, has any, and perhaps you all know, has anything from the archives ever been put on display? And I can attest to a piece of this. So in the old renovation, the first one, when Joyce did create the miniature, what lobby is that? That's the north lobby. There were windows. And we actually had people come from the museum to help us with these display windows. They were people who were experts in display, because that clearly was not my strength. And Joyce was very busy doing the miniature and hated me. And so we had them come. We pulled things from the archives and created professionally displayed reverence to our history, and we pulled things that had specific significance to our history, and we created 3 large windows, actually, with ritual objects and old prayer books and things that were they were beautifully done. And then, of course, that was taken down for the last renovation and put back in archives. But we do have some just beautiful, beautiful things in our history. Some of them are still on display in various places left from that. Some of them have been preserved beautifully. So we did honor it here. I don't know if anybody else knows if they've ever been put on display anyplace else.
Now, the Historic Society only takes written materials. The Indiana history, not history, the Indiana State Museum does have a Judaica section, and if we have artifacts or anything like that that we would like them to, you know, we would want them to have in their collection, that's where they would have to go. But we haven't used the windows in front of the gift shop for displaying some of our artifacts through the years.
And there's a question for Lynn. There's a question for Lynn, but I don't see the question.
I think Enid was the one that wrote it.
I'm sorry?
It looks like Enid Zwern was the one who, she's waving at us.
Oh, okay. So you want to be called on? Is that okay?
Take
Unmute.
yourself
Well,
off mute.
I suggested you look further down. I did write out what the question was.
Oh, I'm
Um,
sorry. I didn't. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I can, as a choir member for 40 years, of course, we sang in the sanctuary before the renovation, and with the renovation, we lost our choir loft, which I clearly was not Americans with Disabilities compliant. So I know that was one consideration. I was very pleased to see the new Bema now is accessible through the ramp for individuals who use wheelchairs or crutches. And sadly, the previous choir loft did not allow that. But I wondered what the thought was when, with the new renovation, that there would be no place set aside for the choir. I have to tell you, we hid lots of things in that choir loft, not the least of which is you see the choir trying to juggle the prayer books and the music books, and where do you put them up and down? So tell me a little bit more about that, please.
So that question really needs to be directed to my mom, because she was the chair of the committee for the most recent renovation. I was not involved in that renovation, so I'm going to hand the baton to her on that one.
Believe it or not, the area in which you sit was designated to be the new choir loft. And it's not that the choir wasn't considered for it, but it was to bring the choir into the congregation as opposed to being above the congregation. So that's why you're where you are right now.
Well, and to make it accessible. I mean, that was a conscious thought to
Right.
We at the time, and still do, had more than one congregants who wanted to participate, who were not able to
get to it
because they couldn't get up there. And
Yeah.
and if they participated, like during the high holy days, then they had to sit in a different place, and it looked awkward and embarrassing. And so it was a conscious decision to bring them into the congregation.
So I'm afraid you can't do any more hanky panky in the choir loft.
That's right. You were having way too much fun, Enid.
That's right.
With that, I think that we are coming to the end of our program. Let me mention, it was mentioned at the beginning of the program by Joyce about the Romanesque architecture of the building that was down on Delaware Street. If anybody goes to New Orleans, one of the Reformed congregations was built by a year after ours. Ours was 1899, theirs was 1900. And if you go in, you will almost see the inside of that 10th Street temple. So it's worth going into just to get a feel what it felt like worshiping in that older building. I would like to end with a thank you. To everybody who made this possible tonight. Our presenters, Eloise Paul, Carolyn Heiser, Joyce Kleiman, Barb Levy, Lynn Levy. Our Q&A hostess, Susan Moss. A special shout out to Sonia Cantor and Joyce Kleinman, who both helped with our PR. To Peter Smith Heisler, our new executive director, and the clergy assistant, Amber Harter, who helped us with technical. And I'm the chairperson of the LAF committee. So from everybody, a big thank you to all of you. And I'd like to let you know about the 4 events that we have coming up for LAF and invite you to join us. On Sunday, the 23rd of May, it's BYOB, Bring Your Own Brunch. We're not allowed to have booze at the park, but it will be at Cool Creek Park up at 151st Street, Shelter D. We are going to have on June 27th a discussion of the movie Fanny's Journey, which is an absolutely wonderful movie. We have a professor who's going to talk with us. She is an expert in the historical background of Jews from France who were caught up in the Holocaust. So that will be our conversation afterwards. We do have a committee meeting on June 3rd, and everybody is welcome to join us. And then we're going to have a BYOD, Bring Your Own Dinner, and a Havdalah at Holiday Park. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Big shout out and thank you to our presenters. Have a good evening and enjoy the nice weather, everybody.
And
Take
thank
care.
you, Marcia, for all